Dear beautiful souls, today I would like to speak about the elephant in the room that has not been addressed over the last few years. A lot of you spiritual practitioners have felt it. When you were seeking during the so-called lockdowns, when you were seeking to go on retreats and you weren't allowed to get in because you didn't have a certain popular injection in the system. Let's speak about the enormous spiritual corruption during that time and what it actually compares to and what needs to be done in order to correct it. I made a list of a few points I would like to address here. So what I generally observed during this time was the failure of monks to detect evil. And this wasn't exclusive to any particular school of Buddhism or Hinduism. This is something that happened worldwide. Prominent example was, for example, the Tibetan leadership. The Dalai Lama got publicly injected on television for the whole world to see, so obviously supporting the transhumanist agent. So that tells you that the Tibetan leadership was incapable of detecting the evil and the demonic activity when it happened and even supported it. Well, Tibetans were not alone in this. Plenty of Zen Buddhist monks supported taking the jab on social media. A so-called Zen teacher that I saw also on social media expressing himself even called Dr. Fauci a hero. Monks of Plum Village in France, which are part of the Thich Nhat Hanh's legacy, his students that are still alive. So many of them during his funeral were wearing masks. So basically buying in the delusion of fear, buying into it, supporting it. Many Buddhist retreat centers demanded of practitioners to be jabbed to be allowed to enter. So there was an obvious discrimination taking place. Famously, Sadghuru of the Ishtar Foundation demanded of all his followers to be jabbed, or they might as well live on a mountain away from society. Well, that's what a genuine yogi does. A genuine yogi goes away from society, doesn't buy into the mass hallucination, and does his proper practice. This, and I want to point out that this is very, very similar to the priests of the Catholic Church in Nazi Germany supporting the regime during World War II, or comparable to Buddhist monk supporting Emperor Hirohito's fascism in Japan. Nobody came out with a clean vest here, apparently, or at least very few. Now, interestingly is that the Buddhist indoctrination in this case, because as Buddhist practitioners, we love to speak about compassion, but again, compassion without wisdom is just stupidity. It's not actually compassion, it's just to follow something that we believe what compassion is without actually knowing and understanding it. Many Buddhist practitioners would say it's compassionate to get injected with a transhumanist agent. And if you don't take it, you're not compassionate, so you're being shamed. But obviously they were wrong. I remember making a video on this particular at the very beginning of the injections being rolled out, and I shared a vision that the goddess Kali gave me about the utter destruction that these injections gonna cause. Of course, this video was taken down back then, and I was flagged with medical misinformation. So, in these type of great crises, when there is a psychic or psychological pressure applied onto society through evil, false practitioners are exposed because they cave in, they submit to the paradigm, using whatever is within their belief system to rationalize their behavior, while genuine practitioners cultivate virtue through resistance. You have seen this in human society where saints, for example, become martyrs, where Tibetan lamas resisted occupation, set themselves on fire or whatever, took whatever they had to take in terms of personal suffering in order to resist evil. This is how a soul transcends, let's say, being caught in a web of delusion. Of course, I'm not saying light yourself on fire. Don't misquote me on this. Don't put me out of context. But the point is to resist evil by whatever non-violent means that are accessible to you. And of course, many monks did not do what they preached. Instead, they submitted to the pressure that was arising because they actually wanted to be accepted by society. Genuinely, Buddhist doctrine is something that is designed to deprogram the ego of a human being in such a way that they stop being a member of society that is part of the mass hallucination. The mass hallucination is removed through meditation, through correction of thought, and so on. But obviously, many monks did not understand this, and I'm not going to judge them. I also do know that a lot of them lacked the meditative ability, lacked the knowledge in order to understand that evil was right there. So it was a detection issue. But this issue needs to be named, this issue needs to be addressed. In all famous religious stories that are about enlightenment and reaching God, there is an archetype that you can all observe. For example, Buddha resisted the demonic temptation in the jungle during his meditations. So, resisting the pull of the dark, either to submit or to give into desire, to give into fear, needs to be resisted by a practitioner. That's a fact. So did Yeshua, Jesus, in meditation on the mountain when he encountered the devil. Resisting evil is the true practitioner's duty. However, the famous religious bodies had no discernment or way of detecting evil, which shows their corruption. Recognizing evil is a part of the path to enlightenment. Every master who moved on to the final goal was facing enormous evil, either in terms of physical danger or psychic danger. So to pretend that all of that doesn't exist, that's a huge problem. And that's what I see right now in many Buddhist traditions, that the idea of the demonic is seen now as purely conceptual, like it doesn't really exist. That people believe that the ego, in the way that it is constructed, that the ego is a metaphor. Yeah, or let's say rather that the demonic is a metaphor for the ego, for our own personal demons. Not understanding that all our addictions, desires, and fears are directly entangled into a psychic web of demonic control, and that we saw exercised during the lockdowns with the mass propaganda, would people literally put them under a black magic spell to surrender, to submit, to obey. And because Buddhist practitioners fail to recognize this, we have to say that practice has deteriorated enormously and corrections must be made. Well, what type of corrections have to be made? The uncomfortable truth is that in order to detect such evil, well, what did most people rely on really, if they didn't have psychic abilities like certain yogis have, for example? Well, what they did rely on is past life experiences. So subconsciously, a lot of people who emotionally resist this evil, like they felt it coming and they saw it on TV, they saw Bill Gates showing up on every TV station in every country where you see it's completely synchronized. There is no such thing as national sovereignty. Everything was controlled globally. When you see that, you know, if in past lives you had experience of a similar nature, if you saw this happen in Atlantis, if you saw this happen in other previous cultures, if you saw this in Rome when Rome was falling, then you started resisting on some level, because if back then you made the choice to resist, now making the choice to resist was easy because you already had that wisdom. But a lot of people do not have that wisdom. So they could not rely on this past life memory of resistance. So when they were in positions of being monks and priests and so on, they submitted to the system as such. Well, how can this be circumvented? Proper yogic meditation practices that lead actually to the psychic ability of seeing evil, detecting evil, knowing evil. And every yogi or Buddhist monk who practices genuinely and increases in divine light, what will happen is that once the light enters them, as a side effect, they will be hyper aware of darkness. They will see their own darkness and they will see the darkness of other people. And this is a very painful state to be in, to be so conscious of evil, where you can't just say, oh, that's just ignorance, or they're all innocent, they just don't know, because you start seeing it. You start seeing the decisions that people make. You start seeing your own decisions maybe that you have made in past lives where you supported evil. But to then shy away and to flinch leads exactly to the ego taking control of the practitioner, and the ego then again is a demonic construct that is fed by demonic thought, by a demonic thought matrix, and that leads to the practitioner shying away from seeing evil out of fear, out of shame, or whatever. But my own teachers have made this very clear to me over the centuries, is to look evil straight in the eye. And that means once our light comes, to not start flinching, to not start wobbling, but to maintain our inner integrity and to act as if the world doesn't exist, only act based on divine law, and to reject submission to the paradigm. Something has to change. Do you agree? Well, contemplate this, and maybe some of you can leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening.